I think this show will be relevant tonight.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
Yeah. Where are we? There we are. Okay. Yeah, oh boy, that's a tough start. You know, when you start a show off kind of weird like I just did, sometimes a technical follows. Great to have you aboard. Are you blackjack players by any stretch? You know how sometimes when the dealer's showing a pretty good hand, you buy insurance on your bet, thinking, you know, I like this, but I'm going to buy insurance on it. Or maybe you're a hedge fund guy, or I don't know, or maybe you're somebody who just bets against the probabilities. I'm wondering about all those dynamics as we speak, because for those of you who watch this show on a regular basis, you know on Fridays we've taped the show on Thursday. We tape 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And on Thursday, we tape 2 shows, including our Friday show, which is great because we get a chance not necessarily to reflect on today's news, because we're not here on Friday, and to expand some thoughts. The shutdown and what's happening right now, as I record this program on Thursday afternoon, I project to last until next week. There's a little bit of me that says, like Friday at 3 o'clock, meaning 3 hours, 4 hours before you saw the early show, or tonight's show 9 hours before, they settled this sucker, and some of what we talked about will be obsolete. The Trump world has done this to me probably a half a dozen times over the course of 16, 17, and 18, but we shall see. Anyway, I'm a little loosey-goosey tonight, meaning Thursday afternoon. But this is an original show, and I've got a terrific guest, a sociologist and international affairs professor, Michael Kennedy from Brown, who is no stranger to the show. He's a world traveler and a big thinker, and I'm sure he has plenty to say about what is going on. So let us start with what we knew when we recorded the program yesterday midday, and that was a pretty volatile Wednesday into Wednesday night, where the State of the Union address was eventually postponed, not relocated, not, you know, done out of an arena or the Oval Office or somebody's garage out of protest. This bang, bang, bang between the president and the Speaker of the House has ended in, all right, I guess I'll wait, meaning she won. Here's what the network produced.
Both sides agree. There will be no State of the Union address until the longest government shutdown in history comes to an end.
Because government is closed.
Yesterday afternoon, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi revoked the president's invitation to address Congress next week.
She doesn't want the American public to hear what's going on.
The president eventually yielded to the speaker. In a pair of late-night tweets, he wrote, "This is her prerogative. I look forward to giving a great State of the Union address in the near future."
A deal is on the table.
Today, the Senate will hold 2 votes to reopen the government, but both appear doomed to fail.
It's frustrating. It's angering.
Colette Hull is the wife of an air traffic controller in Las Vegas.
To the government, to the president, and to anyone listening, you're causing a lot of suffering.
She's not alone. A CBS News poll finds 6 in 10 Americans say the government shutdown is causing serious problems for the country.
You know, what's interesting about that, Professor, that's without a major catastrophe. That's impacted by economic reports of maybe zero growth first quarter if this thing doesn't get resolved. That's the bleed of the daily trials and tribulations of everyday working Americans who are affected directly by the furlough and or by working and not being paid. That number would most likely go from what, 0 to 60, 60 to 99%. If a plane falls out of the sky, God forbid, God, can you imagine, some military calamity that is attributed to morale and or manpower? You nod your head. What are you thinking? Welcome, by the way.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
It's always great to have you.
You always make me think. And in anticipation of today, I was looking back to when I was here last. And 2 times ago, you said, give me a theory of Trump. And I failed miserably. So the next time I thought I should change genre, and I don't know if you recall, but I gave you a soap opera of Trump. And that went over big among my friends. I don't know if it went over big among your viewers. But this time, I decided that I needed to write a novella.
Really?
And it goes like this. It was the best of times and the worst of times. Unfortunately, the best of times is very brief. And that is that Trump is learning. He's actually learning to follow the lead of Speaker Pelosi. And that, I take, is a great step toward progress. Unfortunately, he's got two hugely terrible things around him. The first is what he's doing to shut down the government. Why? Because he wants a wall. Why? Because he needs to fulfill a campaign promise. And why does he need to fulfill that campaign promise? Because he hasn't done much else. That's good. The second thing that's surrounding him is, of course, the Mueller investigation. And he's making that problem worse because of the ways in which he's treating witnesses and engaging in witness tampering. So there's a lot for us to talk about, so I'm relieved I can get it off my chest with you.
Yeah, well, that's a good opening salvo, but maybe you want, not that I'm putting you on the spot because you're not in a position to be on the spot, but don't you agree that the polling data will zip through the pressures on the dynamic will be changed if, God forbid, we have some kind of tragedy attributed to the shutdown? I mean, that is the thing, you know, early on when we were talking with guests about this, you know, days before and then days after it happened. It's kind of like, yeah, you know what, America won't really react to this too terribly much unless and until something tragic happens. Well, now, 34 days in as we tape, 35 as you're seeing, unless something happened. Everyone's just reacting to the slow drip of pain felt by the people affected and the economy that is already seeing some problems.
So I so admired your guest last night, Sarah Stepalovich. The fact that so many people can endure.
Wife of a Coast Guard employee. Yes.
Yeah. So we're already suffering, and that suffering is focused on the people who are furloughed. It's focused also on the people who are not getting paid because they're contract workers.
But the word "we" is interesting. You know, does all of America feel what those people feel? My phone lines don't reflect that quite yet.
No.
No.
But people who travel know it. 10% of TSA workers are not showing up. And when I look on the screen and see how many flights all of those air traffic controllers have to manage, I don't want them to be worried about whether they're going to make their mortgage. When I think about what the FBI is trying to do to secure our borders, this is what Trump's priority is. In fact, they are unable to fulfill their role because they don't have the money for the operations they need to conduct. So I do see a path out of this. And I frankly hope that when the Senate meets, and we will know this by the time this airs, I frankly hope that both bills will be defeated, but one of those bills will be sent back to committee so that the committee can find the compromise that will enable government to work. Because it's not actually the Congress and the Senate that can't function. It is Mitch McConnell who's refusing to bring this to the floor. Mitch McConnell and Trump are responsible for the shutdown.
At the same time, you know, McConnell's not one to put a vote on the floor that's not going to pass. This one is not going to carry the 60 votes necessary.
Right. So send it back to committee, and then they'll find a way out. But you've got to trust Mitch McConnell is only protecting the president. He's not protecting our country.
I guess when we come back, we should talk about the idea as to whether the compromise that our guest predicts will cause a real between Mueller and Trump. I should say, well, that's Freudian, between the Senate Majority Leader and Trump. Stay with us. And so this is what Donald Trump wrote late last night as the shutdown was going on. Nancy Pelosi asked me to give the State of the Union. I agreed. Then she changed her mind because of the shutdown, suggesting later date. That's her prerogative. I will do the address when the shutdown is over. I am not looking for an alternative venue for the address because there's no venue that can compete with the history, tradition, importance of the House chamber. I look forward to giving a great State of the Union address in the near future. Let me say this. I think Nancy Pelosi depantsed the president yesterday. I mean, just literally depantsed him. But I have to give him credit because rather than saying, you know, adding this, because they've been back and forth, if you follow the chronology, and you could alliterate it as well, what I expected from him was alternative site, screw everybody. And finally he just went, all right, I'm turning the temperature down on this thing. Good for him. You see it that way?
I actually try to give him credit when
sometimes you got to know when you just got beat.
And he, well, you know what? He gets beat all the time and he keeps fighting. Not this time.
This time he's...
And so why?
Why?
So I think he's aware of what happened in the fall, even though he denies it. The Women's March that took place immediately after his inauguration had as a focus getting many more women and people of color in the Congress. And they are now in the Congress. They are in the House of Representatives, mainly in the Democratic Party, almost exclusively in the Democratic Party, but still. And as a consequence of his loss of the House of Representatives, the Democrats now control it. Speaker Pelosi is a formidable foe for him. And, you know, one might say that she is his worst nightmare because she is a strong, smart woman that he doesn't maybe know how to deal with, except when he uses emotion and affect to diminish others, and he can't do that to her.
Right.
She's too good.
So let's make sure we're keeping score here. Once upon a time, there was a campaign promise, as you so well alliterated. You gave all of the chronological things, and I think it's all true. It's a campaign promise, but it's much more about the campaign promise than it is about the substance of the product. Even, I mean, there are people who still don't understand that even the $5.7 billion ask has like 260 miles worth of wall. Or steel barrier. And to his credit, he has changed the language. I don't know that the rest of the country's picked up on it, but he's talking about steel barriers. I think eventually there's going to be some kind of compromise on increased funding for security and things that someone might call a barrier and some might not. Right. So I mean that's kind of where this whole thing will probably work out. But remember, he wants to own the shutdown. It's a shutdown. All of a sudden he's like, well, it's call it what you want, but it's not a shutdown. Well, it's their shutdown, but he's on record. I'll own the shutdown. The shutdown occurs. The thing that's challenging about this is that he, after a week or two, was saying, look, end the shutdown and I'll end the shutdown for $5.7 billion. He may shut down the currency. I was trying to explain to whoever would listen, shutting down opening the government or shutting down the shutdown is a byproduct of a compromise. They're not the same things. She is saying, I'm not using the shutdown as currency. Open the government and we'll have a negotiation. And she is winning that argument. He says, I'm ready to do the State of the Union. She says, I'm worried about the shutdown. He's like, that's all right. I'm now telling you I'm coming Tuesday. She's like, no, you're not. And rather than him saying, well, I'm doing it anyway, he's waiting. That, I think, this will probably be the pivotal moment, right? Yes. You're the guest, but I'm asking, do you see it that way?
Yes. So he realizes that he can't bully his way around her or through her. So what he needs to do is to find a way out. He just gestured in this fashion. His, putative compromise was no compromise. He was talking to his son-in-law and to his vice president about how to compromise. That's not how you compromise. So what is really important right now is to find a way for him to say, I have the wall, and to allow the Democrats to say, yes, we are committed to increasing border security. Stop saying these horrid things. If you want to negotiate with Nancy Pelosi, don't tell her that she is the captive of people who want open borders. She is a responsible leader, and that's the only way that you could have a pragmatic solution.
We don't have the tape, but to your point, when he was sitting in a post-meeting environment yesterday in the mid-afternoon, that's exactly what he was going to the liberal Democrats, the radical Democrats have captured the leadership. They are now prisoners of a radical left that is ruining this country. And I don't think anybody believes it. And it's kind of like his go-to, and his go-tos, like it's almost as if there are no bullets in his pistol. It's kind of like click, 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 it's empty. And I think maybe someone was able to finally convince him last night that the playbook isn't working.
So, but here's the thing that always mystifies me about Trump. What is the playbook supposed to accomplish? It's clearly not designed to accomplish the solution to functional problems, because building a wall is not solving border security. It's not stopping the flow of illegal drugs. What it is doing is fulfilling the campaign promise. It's almost like, let me just give this analogy. You know what I think Donald Trump has? I think he has Game of Thrones envy, because he wants to be able to sit in that Iron Throne, and he wants to be able to build a Game of Thrones type wall. But that's not what America needs. That might be what he needs. That might be what his base would like to see him, sitting on that throne. But that's a way to evade the problem and the promise of a dialogue that resolves these solutions for Sarah Stepalovich and her other like-situated people.
I think your diagnosis of the president has been on the mark the entire way, all the time we've met and talked about him. I think you're correct. The one thing I would dispute is whether or not there is rationale for some kind of barrier in certain sections of the border. And the one thing I think Nancy Pelosi tripped up over was to suggest that the whole concept is immoral. I don't believe the rest of her Democratic leadership buys that. I think and the history's already proven that there are too many Democrats who have gone to funding a bigger wall than we have right now in the past, Schumer included, and all of that. And so I think this becomes a little bit murky. Somewhere along the line, the president's got to acquiesce to the idea that even what he's asked for is this much wall versus the concept of everyone having a big China wall.
Right.
She's got to be able to go, well, it's not immoral because we're doing it in a high-tech way, and it's less blah, 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 a statement, and it's more execution of security protection. That's going to happen. He's got to get some of that, and I don't know that at the end of the day, there isn't tangible benefit for the public in addition to just the campaign promise. He's going to have to get a little bit of wall, call it what you want, don't you think?
Being a lad who grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, I appreciate the value of steel slats.
Okay, well there you go. There's the compromise. And then what complicates this, though, is the idea that this drama is probably a whole lot palatable than the Mueller investigation and/or Congress picking the brain of Michael Cohen. We'll be right back.
In recent weeks, the president and Giuliani have both made veiled references to Cohen's father-in-law, a Ukrainian immigrant who decades ago pleaded guilty to financial crimes. This was Mr. Trump 10 days ago.
He should give information maybe on his father-in-law, because that's the one that people want to look at.
And Giuliani on Sunday.
He may have ties to something called organized crime.
All right, so this is a tactic that Rudy Giuliani is out there impeding a witness is amazing to me. But Michael Cohen decided, this is Friday, you're watching this, decided on Wednesday that he was not going to testify on February 7th. Now we hear that he will respond to a subpoena and respond maybe in limited form, maybe plead the fifth. But that's not what they want. Congress wants a freewheeling conversation. They don't want him hedging his bets or being protective. What do you make of this one? This is something. I don't know how in heaven's name. Lanny Davis, the attorney for Michael Cohen, is asking for congressional censure. I think it makes a lot of sense, but it's almost as if nobody wants to screw around with this guy, even though in normal times you couldn't get away with half the stuff they're doing.
So, tampering with a witness is a crime. It is, in the minds of some, a crime that deserves impeachment. There's an article out in The Atlantic recently that is proposing that impeachment would be a cleansing process for the country. I don't think so. I think it will likely generate even more hateful
I don't want to see it. The divide will be brutal.
I think he needs to be impeached, but it needs to be done if he is found to be guilty of collusion and obstruction of justice. This is already evidence of obstruction of justice. The way in which he and Rudy Giuliani is about to be sued for this kind of thing. And as a former attorney general, you know he's going off the deep end. So to me, the mystery in all of this is, why is Rudy Giuliani still out there? And why is Trump recurrently committing these crimes? And that is because he's afraid. He is scared of what Michael Cohen is going to say.
What's interesting, though, is that in this new world, that which is in plain sight seems to be, you know, obstruction of justice and tampering with a witness is this. Hey, listen, I'll get back to you. Yeah, okay, send them. That's right. What we all, not as opposed to statements on Sunday news shows, and that it's out there like we're talking about, mitigates the general public and even Congress's ability to digest it, digest what it actually is, and then respond and act on it. So you're right. It's all about this Mueller report. What you wonder, though, is that is the Mueller report postponed from its end every time they open up their mouths on a Sunday television show? Because every time they open up their mouths on a Sunday television show, they're adding into what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And he can discriminate, and he can make those points, right?
Yes. So one of there's one great added value, I think, to having the Mueller report sort of extended outward. And that is, it is giving time for Republicans to see that Trump is destroying their party. And it's giving them time to maybe whip up some courage. And you see it already, right? Look at all the Republican senators who opposed the legislation in the Senate to end the sanctions on Deripaska. Look at all the Republicans who stood by that resolution. Still 22 Republicans opposed a resolution saying that we shouldn't ever get out of NATO. I don't get that, except for the fact that Trump is trying to create the GOP as the GOT, the Trump Loyalty Party. I gotcha, right? And that party is going to go down in flames. So if there is a hashtag responsible Republican, I put that on Twitter all the time. Every time I see a responsible Republican stepping up, I celebrate them, because we need to give them a little bit of tang to be able to jump out of this moon
30
that they're
seconds.
sunk in.
30 seconds left. It's always great. You have a prediction on when the shutdown will end?
Yes.
When?
After the show airs.
Oh, next week.
Next week.
That we're safe.
We're safe. It's not going to end tomorrow.
All right, from your lips to God's ears. Not that God really worries about this stuff. What camera? That camera. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Awesome. Final word and we come back. All right, so, you know, it's kind of funny. In a way, I hope that this program was semi-obsolete, semi at least on the shutdown, because people went back to work knowing they're going to get paid. But my guess is that we'll have plenty to follow up next week. From Washington to the latest in Rhode Island, even to Fall River and the controversies with the mayor there. Lots in store for next week's programs. You have a great weekend. Hang in there. Those of you in Newport, help each other. It'll be over soon. Good night.